Hi, welcome back to Sociology 226, Karl Marx Video 2. In this video, I have 3 tasks. In the first, I want to explore the critique of political economy that you just read in the 1844 manuscripts. Secondly, I want to look to some of Karl Marx's other work, The German Ideology and Capital, focusing mostly on the former. Finally, I want to show you how to do Marxist sociology and prepare you for the 2-paragraph response question for this week. Let's get started. Let's begin with Karl Marx's critique of political economy. Marx is interested in the material conditions where we dwell. This is where political economy comes in. He is not, obviously, going to accept the basis of the political economic argument that I spelled out earlier. But why? I'm going to look at 3 different reasons why Marx would take an objection to the story about Bob's Burgers that I told you earlier. These reasons are 1. History, 2. Production, 3. Commodity relations. Marxism is also often referred to as historical materialism. The first objection, then, has to do with the problem of history. Marx's initial problem with the political economists' formulation of the division of labor is that it never actually happened. Abstract moms and pops do not sell abstract burgers in abstract burger joints. Perhaps they do in economics textbooks, but not in real life. To take a general proposition, like the point that dividing labor increases productivity, is to eliminate the real historical conditions where trade takes place. It's not like the history of Canada went like this. There were indigenous people happily dividing labor between each other until the French showed up who were like, "Bonjour, mes amis, who wants to trade for wine?" And the people who were already here said, "Okay, why not?" And then, in this pretend story, the English showed up and said, "What's up, my dudes? Who wants clothing?" And then everyone traded and increased their consumption accordingly. What a happy story of getting along. Of course, as we all know, this didn't happen. There were a bunch of fights and wars, and the colonial project continues. For Marx, this is the real historical development of the economy itself. Both production, exchange, and property relationships are deeply embedded in Canada's history of colonialism. Marx's second objection comes from the way that we produce goods, the problem of production. What do we mean by the problem of production? Well, my first-year economics textbook used the classic tale of the farmer and rancher deciding to trade as an example of the trade relationship. We look to Bob's Burgers. But here's the question. Who's doing the work in our economy? The fundamental actors in the industrial economy are not sole proprietor farmers and ranchers. The fundamental relationship is between owners and workers. At least, this is the case in Marx's time. So, not farmers and ranchers, or family restaurants, but proletariat and bourgeoisie. Whereas the owners of the means of production are able to reap the benefits of efficiency, workers' wages do not see the same increase. The capitalists sink surplus value into further capital rather than wages. At least, this is Marx's argument. In line with the historical dimension, we can say that production, too, is based on a particular set of material relations. In capitalism, the cast of players changes to the proletariat and bourgeoisie. This power dynamic reflects the tensions inherent in capitalist production. The key site of capitalist inequality is drawn from surplus value, derived from the production process. Finally, and stemming from the first 2 objections, we have the issue of commodity relations. Just as there is an historical process whereby workers and owners have come into existence, there is another by which commodities come to be what they are. Here, Marx makes a fundamental distinction between what he calls use value and exchange value. Let's use the example of an apple. You can go to the grocery store and buy apples for what? $2 a pound? The exchange value of an apple comes in the amount of money that you pay to buy or sell it for. This comes in distinction from its use value. The use value is what you get from using it, as in eating the apple. When Marx is talking about commodity relations, he is speaking about a world where things are only treated according to one, and often at the expense of another. We produce and consume things for surplus value, rather than the inherent useful properties of a thing. Marx has a particular phrase, commodity fetishism, to express this transformation of things under capital. When Marx refers to commodity fetishism, he means the irrational belief that individual things have an exchange value outside of the historical social relations that make it so valued. Let's summarize Marx's critique of political economy before moving on to ideology. Here we can summarize Karl's 3 problems. That the models used by political economists, what Marx will call bourgeois economics, are ahistorical and don't know where laborers and commodities came from. that models of economic productivity lose what actually happens to the people who are laboring, and, finally, how values are constituted. Remember in video 1, I told you about Karl Marx's colleagues, the young Hegelians, from his early philosophical period. The German ideology, written a year after the 1844 manuscripts, but never published, extends Marx's critique of idealism from that time. The book applies a very similar critique to philosophical thought as the one we've just discussed about political economy. The book, The German Ideology, is a polemic rather than a full argument. Other people have filled out this argument since, and we're going to keep coming back to it in SOCY 226 and SOCY 227. So what's the critique of ideology? Let's look to the most famous quote coming from the book. Here I'm reading you the first line in the preface. Hitherto, men have always formed wrong ideas about themselves, about what they are, about what they ought to be. Let us liberate them from these chimeras, the ideas, dogmas, imaginary beings under the yoke of which they are pining away. Let us revolt against this rule of concept. Whereas in the 1844 manuscripts, Marx is taking aim at political economy, a particular way of understanding the world of commerce and labor and value, in the German ideology, Marx and Engels are applying this to consciousness more generally, as it appears in the Hegelian system. Sociologists since then have taken a particular critique of Hegelianism and developed it into a theory of ideology. There is a crucial move here from theories about human life to following human life as it actually unfolds. As I said, much of the theory of ideology is developed after Marx and Engels died. I'll focus a bit on it here, but also in my lecture on Dorothy Smith at the end of this semester. This position will lead to what many will call a base superstructure argument. There is a basis of material existence through which we produce stuff. We produce, we consume. As we do so, we think, within those prescribed conditions. We write plays, we listen to music. We participate in politics, or we get mad at people when they don't. But all of this conscious activity is structured by our material existence. We then have a superstructure only made possible and determined by that economic base. Culture, religion, politics, social structure, art, almost everything but our productive labor fits into this category. Here we see that the dominance of material relations at the base is found at the superstructure. Here we are addressing more than just the contents of thought, but its genesis. We have here the second most famous quote from that book on how dominant material actors produce dominant forms of thought. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relations. The dominant material relations grasped as ideas. Hence, of the relations which make the one class the ruling one. Therefore, the ideas of its dominance. Page 59. This is extremely important. Ideology is not, in Marx and Engels' sense, just a bunch of ideas. Ideology is a series of abstractions, distinct from our material existence, that we use mistakenly to interpret the world. Interpretations are different from real material facts. A science of society, like a science of anything else, begins and ends with these facts. If you are following a Marxist ideological approach, that is. In closing, I want to look to the different ways that we can put the material that you've learned in this video, the previous video, and in the readings to work. Doing Marxist sociology. Work being the operative Marxist word. 3 factors are crucial. For Marx, social structures are material structures. That means that we can find the primary agent of all social change in the ways that people produce, consume, and work. Politics, culture, all that stuff is ultimately determined by material forces. So this is where you do your interviews and collect your data, where production is realized. This is where social order gets going. Everything else is caused by it. Marx suggests that material conditions shape our lives and we inherit them from the past. So when looking through one's sociological lens, we must begin in the past. This is the sense in which people use the term historical present to indicate that things could have been otherwise, but weren't, for very specific reasons. The Marxist looks for material reasons. Finally, if all consciousness is shaped by material conditions, then the way that we see the world is determined by where we are in the series of productive forces. This includes those who we interview, but also those doing sociological research. All thought takes place from a particular standpoint. We can use this point to counter ideological positions that try to conceal their place in the economic order. That's it for me this week. Now it's your turn. In 2 paragraphs between 5 to 8 sentences in length. 1. Explain Marx's conceptual critique of the division of labor with reference to the readings. 2. Evaluate the critique. Is it still applicable in contemporary society? Use an example of an industry, for example, farming or retail, to make your case. Remember, I don't just want a summary of the lecture. A response worth full marks will actively engage the assigned reading material.